So, good day, everyone. Today, I will be discussing the second part of antibacterial drugs. We will be covering the rest of antibiotics, some concepts about sterilization, disinfection, and clinical importance of antibiotics. So, let's proceed. So, the antibacterial 2 will cover mostly the folic acid metabolism, and these drugs are your trimethoprim and sulfonamides. We will also cover the DNA gyrase inhibitors such as your quinolones. And lastly will be your cytoplasmic membrane structure such as polymyxins and daptomycins. So let's proceed with folic acid inhibitors. So your folic acid inhibitors are your sulfonamides, trimethoprim, and fluoroquinolone. But for this part, we will start first with your sulfonamides, trimethoprim, and your trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. So sulfonamide susceptible organisms, unlike mammals, cannot use your exogenous folate but must synthesize it from PABA or your p-aminobenzoic acid. So this pathway is thus essential for the production of purines and nucleic acid synthesis. As structural analogs of PABA, your sulfonamides inhibit your dihydropteroate synthase enzyme and thus inhibiting the production of your folic acid. Sulfonamides inhibit both gram-positive bacteria such as Staphylococcus, gram-negative enterics, Escherichia coli, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Salmonella, and Shigella. Whereas your trimethoprim inhibits your dihydrophiate reductase enzyme, inhibiting again the production of your purines. So now let's dwell into the sulfonamides. So the main mechanism for resistance of sulfonamides results from the mutation that cause overproduction of PABA and can cause production of a folic acid synthesizing enzyme that has low affinity for sulfonamides or those that impair permeability to sulfonamides. As for its pharmacokinetics, it is divided into three groups. We have the oral absorbable, which is absorbed from the stomach and distributed widely to tissues and body fluids. We have the oral non-absorbable, and we even have topical agents. So the protein binding varies from 20 to 90%. The therapeutic concentrations range from 40 to 100 microgram per ml, and the blood levels generally peak 2 to 6 hours after oral administration. As for its clinical uses, they are rarely used as single agents. And please remember that your sulfonamides, these are actually fixed drug combination of trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. So the examples of your oral absorbable, so these are your TMP-SMX, known as trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. And please remember, this is the drug of choice for your pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia infection, formerly known as pneumocystis carinii infection, which is an AIDS-defining infection um, for patients with diagnosed with HIV or AIDS. So it's a type of pneumonia seen for patients with HIV or AIDS infection. Your TMPSMX is also used for toxoplasmosis and nocardiosis. Sulfadiazine is first line for acute toxoplasmosis. Sulfadoxime with pyrimethamine is second-line treatment for malaria. Whereas the oral non-absorbable example will be your sulfasalazine, which is, please remember, used for inflammatory bowel diseases. Your topical agents, just forgot to highlight, but the most important here will be your silver sulfadiazine because these are commonly used for burn wounds, and it may cause slow healing of wounds. For its adverse reaction, the most common will be fever, skin rashes, nausea, vomiting, and it can cause urinary tract disturbances because your sulfonamides may precipitate in the urine, especially at neutral or acidic pH, producing crystalluria, hematuria, or even obstruction. It can also cause hemolysis for those with G6PD deficiency, aplastic anemia, and please remember, it can increase the risk for kernicterus in newborn if given to pregnant patients. So again, let's go to trimethoprim and the trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole mixtures. So the mechanism for resistance for trimethoprim is its reduced cell permeability and overproduction of your dihydrofolate reductase or production of an altered reductase with reduced drug binding. So orally, again, your trimethoprim can be given orally alone or with combination with sulfamethoxazole. Most available drugs now are in combination with sulfamethoxazole, and again, this is your TMP-SMX. Intravenously, no, it is also available. It is well absorbed from gut and distributed widely in body fluids, and it has more antibacterial activity in prostatic and vaginal fluids than many other antimicrobial drugs. The half-life is 8 hours, and the dosage is every 8 to 12 hours. Your TMP, SMX, commonly used for urinary tract infections, soft tissue infections, bone and joint infection, pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia, as I mentioned a while ago. And again, the adverse effects include rash, fever, bone marrow suppression, hyperkalemia, and nephrotoxicity. So this is just the same as the previously one I mentioned. The dosage of your TMP-SMX for UTI is 100 milligram twice daily. For pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia infection is 160 milligrams of TMX plus 800 milligram of sulfamethoxazole every 12 hours. And this is also the dose for UTI, prostatitis, uncomplicated skin, and soft tissue infections. So intravenous TMP-SMX is given if you have very severe cases of pneumocystis infection. And oral pyrimethamine with sulfonamide is used for toxoplasmosis. So now let's go to the DNA gyrase inhibitors. So these are your fluoroquinolones. So we have narrow spectrum fluoroquinolones or your first generation, and we have the wide spectrum fluoroquinolones, which are composed of your second, third, and fourth generation. So for the first generation, so this is your norfloxacin. So this is derived from nalidixic acid. It is active against common pathogens that cause urinary tract infections. For second generation, these are your ciprofloxacin and ofloxacin, which has greater activity against gram-negative bacteria. It is also active against the gonococcus and many gram-positive cocci, mycobacteria, and agents of atypical pneumonia. So these are your Mycoplasma pneumoniae, Chlamydophila pneumoniae. Your third generation, the third generation fluoroquinolones, these are your levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, and gemidloxacin. So these are what we refer to as your respiratory fluoroquinolones. These are most commonly used in pneumonia caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae and some strains of Enterococci and even methicillin-resistant Staph aureus infection causing pneumonia. Your gemifloxacin and your moxifloxacin has enhanced activity against anaerobes. And the last one will be your dalafloxacin, which are the next generation of your fluoroquinolone. It has more potent activity versus gram-positive organisms, including pneumococcus and staphylococcus. It has similar activity to ciprofloxacin versus gram-negative organisms, including Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So, what's the mechanism of action of your fluoroquinolone? So your DNA gyrase, no? Um, so your DNA gyrase is an important enzyme for the DNA replication and eventually, no, producing your protein. So your DNA, your fluoroquinolones inhibits your DNA gyrase enzyme. So this prevents the relaxation of your positively supercoiled DNA that is required for normal transcription and eventually replication. Your fluoroquinolones also inhibit your topoisomerase 4 enzyme, and this interferes with separation of replicated chromosomal DNA into the respective daughter cells during cell division. However, now currently we are seeing increased resistance from fluoroquinolones, especially your second generation fluoroquinolones. There have been reports of emergence of resistance against Campylobacter jejuni, gonococci, gram-positive cocci, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Sriracha species. And it is said that the mechanism for resistance is production of efflux pumps in the strains of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Staph aureus, and Strep pneumoniae, and also changes in the porine structure seen in the gram-negative bacteria. Another mechanism of resistance is changes in the sensitivity of the target enzymes via point mutations in the antibiotic binding regions. Examples, mutations in the quinolone resistance determining region of the GYRA gene that encodes your DNA gyrase, leading to a responsible resistance in gonococci infections. As for its pharmacokinetics, it has very good oral bioavailability. But please remember that your iron antacids with multivalent cations or those containing with calcium may interfere with its absorption. So it has good tissue penetration. However, please note that norfloxacin does not achieve adequate plasma levels for use in most systemic infections. And most fluoroquinolones undergo renal elimination via active tubular secretion. And again, please note, no, a drug used for uric acid, probenecid, no, this can block your fluoroquinolone secretion. Dosage reductions are usually needed, especially if patients have renal dysfunction, except for moxifloxacin, because moxifloxacin is the one that is eliminated partly by hepatic metabolism and also by biliary excretion. That is why among all the quinolones, your moxifloxacin is not recommended for UTIs. So the half-life is usually 3 to 8 hours. So this is a nice drug summarizing the pharmacokinetics of your different quinolones. And as you can see, primarily most of them are renal, but your gemifloxacin, your delafloxacin can be renal and non-renal. And again, no, moxifloxacin is primarily hepatobiliary excretion. Again, for the clinical uses, excuse me. For the clinical uses of your quinolones, these are effective for infections of urogenital and gastrointestinal tracts caused by these gram-negative organisms. So they are used widely for respiratory tract infection, skin and soft tissue infections. Specifically, no, your Cipro and ofloxacin, they are previously used as alternative to ceftriaxone or cefixime in gonorrhea. However, it is not currently recommended because of resistance. So your ciprofloxacin most commonly is used now for urinary tract infection. Your ofloxacin eradicates Chlamydia trachomatis. Your levofloxacin is used for community-acquired pneumonia plus Chlamydia, Mycoplasma, and Legionella species. Gemi and moxifloxacin has wide spectrum of activity. It can cover not only gram-negative but also gram-positive organisms, the atypical pneumonia, some anaerobic bacteria. Meningococcal carrier state, it can also be used to tuberculosis treatment as second line and prophylaxis in neutropenic patients. Your delafloxacin is used for lower respiratory tract infection and more potent activity against atypical organism. As for its toxicity, GI distress is still the most common. However, they can have CNS effects such as insomnia, dizziness, and headache, skin rashes, and please remember also phototoxicity, tendinitis, and even tendon rupture. They may damage growing cartilage and cause arthropathy, and therefore not recommended for children or pregnant women. They may also increase the plasma levels of theophylline and other methylxanthine, enhancing its toxicity. Your newer fluoroquinolones such as gemifloxacin, levofloxacin, and moxifloxacin can prolong the QT interval and is thus avoided in patients with known QT prolongation and those on certain antiarrhythmic drugs. So now let's go to the miscellaneous antimicrobial agents. Metronidazole. So metronidazole, once it is taken up by anaerobes, it is non-enzymatically reduced by reacting with reduced ferredoxin. So this reduction results in products that accumulate and are toxic to your anaerobic cells. The metabolites of metronidazoles are taken up into the bacterial DNA, forming unstable molecules. And this action occurs only when metronidazole is partially reduced because this reduction usually happens in anaerobic cells and it has relatively little effect on human cells or aerobic bacteria. Therefore, your metronidazole is primarily effective against anaerobic bacterial infection. So, again, the effect on human cell is minimal because the reduction occurs mostly in the anaerobic microorganism. Absorption, it is well absorbed orally, but it is also available intravenously. It has wide tissue distribution and can even penetrate your CSF and brain. So the serum level is 46 microgram per ml over 250 milligram oral dose. It is again indicated for anaerobic mixed intra-abdominal infection, please remember, as well as your pelvic inflammatory disease, together with agents for aerobes, vaginitis, and brain abscess. For Clostridium difficile infection use, this is not the first line. IV use with oral vancomycin is used for fulminant cases. So the dosage of metronidazole, it usually 500 milligram orally or IV, 3 times daily or every 8 hours. Adverse effects are GI. However, peripheral neuropathy can be seen for long-term use. Another important thing to note is that it can cause to have alcohol interaction, forming the sulfuram-like reaction if given together with alcohol previously. However, now it is said that it is considered unlikely now. Pregnancy risk is teratogenic in animals but not yet proven in humans. A related drug known as tinidazole is given once daily. This treats your trichomonas, giardiasis, amoebiasis, and bacterial vaginosis. It is active against anaerobes but not US approved for anaerobic infection. So next is your fidaxomicin. This is a narrow-spectrum macrocyclic antibiotic. It is active against gram-positive aerobes and anaerobes. And please remember, gram-positive only, ha? So it has no activity against gram-negative bacteria. So the proposed mechanism of action is that it inhibits bacterial protein synthesis by binding to the sigma subunit of RNA polymerase. So for its absorption and distribution, it is negligible systemic absorption. When taken orally, it has high fecal concentration and minimizes systemic toxicity. So fidaxomicin is approved for use in Clostridium difficile infection in adults. And this should be used only for infections confined in the GI tract. As for its efficacy, it is said that it is as effective as your oral vancomycin. And again, it is the preferred first-line treatment for Clostridium difficile infection. It has lower relapse rates compared to your vancomycin. Excuse me. And the dosage is usually 200 milligram twice a day for 10 days. Next is your rifaximin, which is a derivative of rifampin. So this is active against gram-positive and now gram-negative aerobes and anaerobes. So it inhibits bacterial protein synthesis by binding to the beta subunit of DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. The absorption is less than 0.5% only when taken orally, and it can have very high fecal concentration that is about 8,000 microgram per gram after 3 days for traveler's diarrhea. So you might have heard of this drug. This is commonly known as Normix. The brand name is Normix. So the generic is rifaximin because it is commonly used in traveler's diarrhea. So please remember that. However, your rifaximin can also be used for hepatic encephalopathy, for irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea predominance, and for recurrent or refractory Clostridium difficile infection. The dose is 200 to 550 milligram orally, 2 to 3 times a day. As for the drug interactions, this is not associated with cytochrome P450 mediated drug interactions due to its limited systemic absorption. Next is your mupirocin. Mupirocin is a natural antibiotic produced by Pseudomonas fluorescens. It is available only as topical ointment. So maybe you've heard of this as Bactroban or Foskina. Those are the common brand names of mupirocin. So this is available only topical. Okay, so ointment siya or cream. So it is rapidly inactivated after absorption and has no detectable systemic levels. So it is mostly active against gram-positive cocci, including your methicillin-susceptible Staph aureus and even methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. The mechanism of action, it inhibits staphylococcal isoleucine tRNA synthetase enzyme, blocking protein synthesis of your staph infection. But please note the risk factors for resistance is if it is given for prolonged use and if you give it topical application on large wounds or ulcers. Therefore, it is not recommended if the wound is very large already. So again, it is only used for minor skin infections such as impetigo. It can also be used as nasal decolonization of Staph aureus in patients and healthcare workers. Next is your polymyxins or polymyxins. This includes polymyxin B and polymyxin E. Polymyxin E is the one that is known as colistin. So these polymyxins, they act as cationic detergents. They disrupt your bacterial cell membrane, and they also bind and inactivate endotoxin. So please remember that this is active against gram-negative bacteria. Gram-positive, no, hindi siya kaya. Resistant na siya dyan, together with Proteus and Neisseria. So mostly, your polymyxins for gram-negative bacteria. So it is used systemically. However, it is limited by its possible nephrotoxicity. Before, it was used topically for superficial skin lesions. But now, no, your polymyxin are primarily used for those that has multi-drug resistant infection causing, for example, the bacteria known as Acinetobacter baumannii, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Enterobacteriaceae. Because these microorganisms, no, isa to sa mga pinakamalalakas na microorganism. So if other drugs fail, so the last resort will be this one na polymyxins na to treat these types of infection. That's why your polymyxins, no, tinatawag na silang salvage therapy. So it is available intravenously for salvage therapy when no other options remain. So next, let's talk about the urinary antiseptics. First will be your nitrofurantoin. So urinary antiseptics are oral agents that exert antibacterial activity in the urine but have little or no systemic antibacterial effect. So these are bactericidal for many gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria and even inherently resistant organisms, Pseudomonas, and strains of Proteus. So the mechanism of nitrofurantoin is complex and not fully understood. Intracellularly, it is converted by bacterial reductases into reactive intermediates. And these intermediates react with ribosomal protein and disrupt your metabolic processes and the synthesis of proteins, RNA, and DNA. So it has multiple targets and no single primary mechanism is identified. As for its resistance, there is no cross-resistance with other antibiotics. Resistance develops slowly. That is why your nitrofurantoin can also be given as prophylaxis, especially for patients with recurrent urinary tract infection, because the resistance, no, they develop slowly. So even if they're taking nitrofurantoin, for example, for a month or two already as part of prophylactic treatment, they do not develop resistance. So the nitrofurantoin, no, is a valuable alternative for uncomplicated UTI due to resistance to your TMP-SMX and fluoroquinolones. So these are well absorbed orally, rapidly metabolized and excreted. Again, it has no systemic activity, and the effect is localized only in the urinary tract. It is excreted via the kidneys, and it is contraindicated in patients with kidney disease and having a creatinine clearance of less than 60 ml per minute. So the dose is 100 milligram 4 times a day. The long-acting one, Macrobid, available, is taken twice daily. It contains two forms, the macrocrystalline, 25%, it has lower absorption, and 75% monohydrate, which is released slowly via gel matrix. It is not suitable for upper UTI infection, and the urine pH of less than 5 improves effectiveness, 100 milligram once daily can prevent recurrent UTI in some women. This is what I'm talking about. They're using it as prophylaxis for patients with recurrent UTI. So, GI, ang most common adverse effect. However, for serious adverse effect, it can lead to neuropathies, pulmonary toxicities, hemolytic anemia, and even G6PD deficiency. For its drug interaction, it antagonizes nalidixic acid and some older fluoroquinolones such as Norflo and Cipro. Possible also would be hypersensitivity reactions such as rashes and difficulty of breathing because of lung involvement. So those are your miscellaneous drugs. So now let's talk about, since we're talking about antibiotics, and maybe in your microbiology, of course, or kung nag-take na kayo ng micro, you've learned, I hope you will learn about a lot about the different microorganisms, especially those that are seen in the hospital settings. So 2 years from now, you will be junior interns and will be rotating in the hospital. So I think it is important for you to know as well the different disinfectants, antiseptic, and sterilants that are commonly used in the hospital settings. So first, let's define each of them first. So when you say disinfectants, these are chemical agents or physical procedures that inhibit or kill microorganisms. On the other hand, when you say antiseptics, these are disinfecting chemical agents with sufficiently low toxicity for host cells that they can be used directly on skin, mucous membranes, or even wounds. Sterilants naman kill both vegetative cells and spores when applied to materials for appropriate times and temperatures. So this is a nice table lifted from your Katsung showing the efficacy, no, or highly susceptibility of your different disinfectants and sterilants. Okay, but we will dwell into them in details. So again, when you say antisepsis, this is an application of an agent to living tissue for the purpose of preventing infection. When you say decontamination, this is a process that produces marked reduction in number or activity of microorganisms. And when you say disinfection, this is a chemical or physical treatment that destroys most vegetative microbes and viruses, but not spores, in or on inanimate surfaces such as, for example, table, okay, chairs, okay. Sanitization is a reduction of microbial load on an inanimate surface to a level considered acceptable for public health purposes. Sterilization is a process intended to kill or remove all types of microorganisms, including spores na, and usually including viruses as well, with an acceptably low probability of their survival. And pasteurization is a process that kills non-sporulating microorganisms by hot water or steam at 65 to 100 degrees Celsius. So please, no, always remember that your hand hygiene, no, hand washing is still the most important method for preventing transmission of infectious agents. It prevents transfer from high microbial load areas to infection-prone sites. Alcohol-based hand rubs or soap with warm water are used to kill or remove microbes. Surgical scrubs involve skin disinfectants plus a detergent plus water for hands and arms of surgical team prior to surgery. So again, the recommended duration of treatment during hand washing is 20 to 30 seconds. So now let's talk about alcohols. No? So the two most frequently used are your ethanol and isopropyl alcohol. So this is used both as an antisepsis and disinfection. Yun lang sila, okay? So it will not sterilize. Okay? So it rapidly kills vegetative bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis or TB, many fungi, lipophilic viruses. And again, it is not effective against spores, hydrophilic viruses, and organic materials. So the mechanism of your alcohol mainly is protein denaturation. It is most effective at 60 to 90% concentration in water. Again, it is not effective as sterilant. They do not penetrate protein-rich material. And of course, no, what kind of adverse effect we feel will be dry skin. Therefore, emollients are added to reduce irritation. So alcohol-based hand rubs are very common, especially during the time of COVID era. And this is recommended by CDC or your Center for Disease Control for Healthcare Hand Hygiene. It is effective against SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay? And again, ineffective siya sa mga bacteria-containing spores. So if you are treating a patient with C. difficile infection, you should wash instead with soap and water, not just alcohol only. Please remember, the buyer alcohol is flammable, so it must be stored in a cool, well-ventilated area. It must evaporate before cautery, electrosurgery, and laser surgery. And of course, avoid using in the eyes, okay? It is harmful to corneal tissue. Next will be your chlorhexidine. So it adsorbs to bacterial membranes, causing leakage of small molecules and precipitation of cytoplasmic protein. So it is effective against vegetative bacteria, mycobacteria, fungi, and viruses. And it is very most effective against gram-positive cocci. So it inhibits spore germination, inhibits only, but it is not sporicidal. It has a slower acting than alcohol, however longer persistence, giving residual bactericidal activity. It is resistant to inhibition by blood and organic material. It is inactivated by moisturizers or soap, and the 4% digluconate is slightly more effective than the 2% chlorhexidine, than the 2% digluconate. Your chlorhexidine in 70% alcohol is the one that is commonly used for surgical and percutaneous procedures. And this is preferred over your usual povidone iodine, no, due to faster action, retained activity in body fluids, and persistent skin activity. So it has low skin irritation and sensitization. It has a low oral toxicity. It is contraindicated in middle ear surgery because it can cause sensory neural deafness, and for neurosurgery because it can have a risk for neural toxicity.